We are on with Dr. Eghosa, right?
Eghosa Ekhator.
Okay, we are on with Dr. Eghosa Ekhator, who is a lawyer and with a knack, with a specialization in environmental law, and he's done so much work in the UK with pushing the issues of climate litigation, around the globe. So we are happy and we are lucky to have him. He's a son of the soil. He's from Edo State here, and we learned of his visit, and we decided to grab him to a corner to maximally utilize his tap from his wealth of knowledge and experience. That's why he's on with us here for this program. And so, Dr. Eghosa, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
We are at a crossroads with so many issues buffeting the global community. One of them is the climate crisis. Aside the war, the food issues, but the climate crisis is a burgeoning war, that we are all facing today. The efforts to address them are not the same with the way, stakeholders like government, companies or private sector are addressing them. What's your take on how the climate issues have been addressed globally now?
Thank you very much. I think post 2015 after the Paris Agreement, there appears to be a fundamental change in international consciousness of, in fact, every nation of the world. So the Paris Agreement is one of the most accepted, popular international agreements. It is one of the international agreements that took the shortest time. The signatories are in their hundreds, so there's that international consensus regarding climate change, because climate change affects every country. Some might be worse, but it affects every single country. So in terms of the progress, the international climate change governance system, I think, yes, there is a framework, but the question is it effective? The question is it binding? Because if we look at the issue around Paris Agreement, some people will say the Paris Agreement is an international treaty, but how many countries have actually enacted and domesticated the Paris Agreement into their legal regime? So it's not a matter of signing up to international agreements. Countries have to do the needful, have to ensure that their climate obligations underpin many of their climate change rules and regulations. But back to your question, in terms of the international framework, yes, there is a more, in quotes, effective international framework. I think more can be done. That's why you have this conference of parties conferences every year to develop new additions, new negotiations. I think, but there's more can be done. I think we have somewhat an effective climate change.
Did you follow through with the COP28, the outcomes, the compensation for local communities, the fund for
the loss and damage?
The loss and damage.
Yeah, I did follow through. I think the first thing, there was a consensus on that. Yes, there was an agreement for the first time. There's this agreement that we should have this damage and loss fund. But the question is, what has happened so far?
After COP28.
So it was like we've had a conversation, we've had a discussion, we've agreed, but it appears that it's stuck in the road, because if you look at that, it's going to be very, very expensive to fund the climate damage and loss agreement. And also, many of these Western countries, things are very difficult. Many countries are prioritizing the interests of the citizens. So, in a way, many countries, if you look at, I'll use the example of the SDGs. The SDGs is basically funded with the help of many Western countries, but a lot of Western countries have stepped back from funding the SDGs. For example, the UK is a very good example. They've reduced the funding of the SDGs, they've reduced their international aid because things are quite difficult. So in a way, if you look at the world is not, we're actually going through an economic recession, so that has impacted on that. But I think for me, the takeaway is that there is an agreement. So the next question is there are people talking about loss and damage litigation, talking about how we need to enforce that agreement. I think that's the starting point. There is an agreement. I think more should be done to ensure that countries to live up to their responsibilities, especially the richer countries, not just the richer countries in the West, the richer countries in the developing South, in the global South. They also have a role to play. The South Africa, the Egypt, the China, the Indonesia, the Singapore, they also have a role to play, as well as the USA, the UK, and the rest of them.
Okay, great. So you talked about the Paris Agreement earlier on, and Nigeria, looking at that agreement, decided to put in place the Climate Act, right, 2021. How can you, what's your own opinion as to the Paris Agreement and the Act? What are there weaknesses in the Act, in terms of enforcing the Paris Agreement in Nigeria?
I think the first thing first, yes, we have a law of climate change now. So as mentioned before, prior to 2021, there was no law. So we have a law where there's an existing domestic framework on climate change in Nigeria. So I think the first thing for me is that the awareness. I don't know how many lawyers, how many people, how many citizens are actually aware. If the government has translated this, I always advise that if there's a new law, the principles should be summarized into maybe the broken English or the major languages, and let the people understand. The National Orientation Agency, the Ministry of Information, they have a massive role to play because the law is there. They're saying that it's a new law, This is the third year now. I've not been aware of any litigation of that law, but I know that the government is actually set a lot of administrative bodies into play, like the commission, like appointing the DG, and there appears to be a lot of movement, a lot of motion in terms of what the government is doing. Is that enough? I'm not sure. There are a lot of weaknesses as well. Some talk about the proposed carbon tax as well. Is that going to be double taxation for the MNCs? We talk about the sort of I think in terms of the companies they apply to, there's a limit. The kind of companies they apply to. So there are a couple of issues around it. But the first thing is, as discussed during the conversation, that law needs to be tested. So they are already talking about amending the Climate Change Act, and we have not even done anything what we have. So we need to test it. We need to actually take, if we think that there's a particular section that is not good enough, let's take it to court. What are the NGOs doing with it? What are the relevant stakeholders doing? What are lawyers doing with it? So I think that is where, there's no perfect law. It has many weaknesses, which, as I said, the carbon tax, for example, but we have a law of climate change.
Okay, excellent. Now, can we bring this to the Niger Delta, where there's been so much devastation of the environment by the multinational oil companies? How do you see the Paris Agreement compliance by the MNCs and the Climate Act in Nigeria? How are those reflected, on the operations of multinational oil companies in the Niger Delta?
Yes, I think to answer that question, you have to go back to the evolutionary Paris Agreement. The MNCs are not part of the Paris Agreement, but the MNCs agreed to play a very important role to meet up with whatever obligations were given to country. MNCs were willingly accepted to meet up with those obligations. So from that regard, if you look at many MNCs, you look at their sustainability report, you look at their code of conduct, there is always some mention of the Paris Agreement, the various international soft law mechanisms on MNCs. So from that regard, you can see connection between what the MNCs are doing and the Paris Agreement. But in terms of whether that has been streamed in the Niger Delta, I think that question is a difficult question to answer, because the Niger Delta, the Paris Agreement, the Climate Change Agreement is not a problem in Niger Delta. It's deeper than that. We need to treat the fundamental problems in Niger Delta: poverty, lack of education, environmental degradation. The Paris Agreement, the climate change law, is just an additional law. We have thousands of environmental laws in the Delta. We have the Eghosa Ekhator, the guidelines. We have the environmental plan. We have the various environmental laws. We have NOSDRA, we have NESTRA. What has happened? So what makes the climate change law, for example, different from the previous law? What is the guarantee that the Climate Change Act is going to be implemented successfully in Niger Delta? So I think if you're looking at Niger Delta, you have to look at the bigger picture, not just the Climate Change Act as the totality of the laws. The government need to enforce every single law that relates to that environment, which includes the Climate Change Act, effectively. So you cannot implement the Climate Change Act without restoring the environment. You cannot implement the Climate Change Act without reducing the environment. You cannot implement climate change that without regards providing schools, amenities, and facilities for these people. So, in terms of mitigation adaptation, who's going to fund it? The poor people. Are we trying to ensure that these people are able to mitigate the negative consequences of climate change on them? So, I think, in a way, yes, it can be mainstream, but that is not the answer really. The government needs to basically enforce every single environmental law, regulation in Nigeria.
But has the government done enough from your own perspective? Has the government done enough to mitigate, the crisis in the region?
The answer is no.
And has the government been able to hold the multinational oil companies to account to the various laws in Nigeria?
I think it depends on how you answer that question. It depends on how you answer. Yes, in a way, you can say the government has tried to hold them accountable in terms of the administrative sanctions by most a few times. There have been a few cases for issues by government. But the other question is can the government actually sue share? Is the government not suing? So when we discuss in terms of JVs and US Supreme, I think in a way, I think for me personally, I think the environment, the regulatory environment is a key thing. If the regulatory environment is there,
is it strong? Is it weak?
That is very, very strong. The independence of the regulatory bodies, that is a key issue. So they have the independence, they have the resources, and they have people that look at, if you read the go to Nigeria, look at an example of, let's say, the oil spill investigation, for example, they have the facilities, they have the resources, and they are aware of oil spills. Who gives them the resources to tackle oil spills? Until those challenges are addressed, until NOSDRA have got their helicopters, NOSDRA have got qualified staff, NOSDRA don't need to rely on any specific MNCs. NOSDRA, for example, if you ask NOSDRA, give me the exact number of oil spills in Nigeria, can they give that to you? Until the government body is able to do that, that means, yes, they're actually exhibiting the regulatory capacity. I think regulatory capacity is a key thing. So even though we have all the laws and the agencies are not up and doing, the agencies do not know the remit of the laws. If you look at the NESTRA, for example, those are applied to the oil and gas industry. Then you have NESTRA, you have NOSDRA, you have EGASPIN, you have various oil and gas flaring regulations. You have multiplicity of regulations, NESTRA regulations. To what extent? No solution at the end of the day.
So, where does litigation, come in dealing with the crisis in the Niger Delta?
Litigation can come in to ensure that regulatory bodies live up their responsibilities. For example, if a government agency is not following the laid down procedures, maybe enacting a certain way, it has contravened the law, regulation can ensure that the government agency do the right thing. Regulation can be used to compel government agency to do something or not to do something. So regulation can be a tool, can be like that corrective mechanism that can be adopted by the people to ensure that government live up to its responsibilities.
Okay, maybe lastly, how do you see the efforts of civil society organizations, in pursuing litigation cases against multinational oil companies that have contributed to environmental degradation and pollution in the Niger Delta?
If I'm going to answer that question, I'm going to rephrase that question. My question would be: imagine there was no civil society groups in that sphere. So what would have been your answer? So the thing is that without civil society groups, it would have been a worse disaster. So if you look at the evolution of the SOB, the forward, all the non-violent community-based organizations, in the 80s and 90s, and look at what ANEEJ is doing, what ERA is doing, a lot of NGOs. So many of the cases being instituted by NGOs. If you look at the various reports being done by NGOs, the various innovative, creative, activist actions being taken by the NGOs, they are done by the NGOs. The SERAP case at the Airport of Justice NGO, the SERAC case at the African Commission NGOs. So most of all these cases, most of all these groundbreaking environmental justice cases are done by NGOs. Even the Center for Air Pollution case in 2000 was by an NGO. The Benin's case was supported by NGOs. So in a way, so I think, as I said, what we need to be asking ourselves is that how can NGOs improve their capacity? How can NGOs ensure that they are abreast with recent development technology, laws, etc. Because sometimes you need to go outside and improve your capacity. I think capacity building for NGO staff is very, very important. And also, we should also have affiliates NGOs amongst community members. So the NGO should not be just based solely in Benin City, Port Harcourt.
They are the community-based.
Yeah, you should have representatives
Yeah.
within the communities. Technology has made life easy. You don't need to be physically there. You can do. The people living in those buildings, they have access to Zoom, access to internet.
Yeah.
If there's a disaster, it's just for them to have a mobile phone. They can actually upload it from any part of the world. So the technology, because the technology has democratized access to information. So now information is not just mainstream information. Everybody now, with the use of a phone, you are a journalist. So we need to maximize that and ensure that technology, capacity building, NGOs can do more. Because I think they've not even scratched the surface. We need more NGOs, we need bigger NGOs, we need more collaboration with NGOs and the local people and everybody there. I think that we'll be able to hold government accountable.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Eghosa, for creating time to join us on this our ANEEJ TV program. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.